So I only really seriously started studying when I was 17, trying to enter into medical school. Since then, I have studied easily over 10,000 hours. I've studied medicine, I've studied education, learning science, computing, marketing, business, accounting, all sorts of different things. And for the first 5 or 6 years of studying, I probably spent twice the amount of time that I needed to. I have made more mistakes than most, but I have learned from them. In this video, I want to share 3 of the most mind-blowing realizations that I had around studying. Each of these realizations resulted in me making massive improvements to my learning ability. And make sure to stick around because the last realization alone probably accounted for at least 80% of all of the wasted time over the years. And the changes I made because of it are what allowed me to eventually become a top scholar. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm Dr. Justin Sung. I'm a full-time learning coach and learning researcher. I'm also the head of learning at I Can Study and a former medical doctor. Over the last decade, I've worked with tens of thousands of people from around the world to help them learn more efficiently. Before we jump in, I'd appreciate if you could give this video a like to help with the algorithm. So one of my first major realizations was that you can kind of overdose on learning techniques. Let me explain. In medicine, there is this concept of a therapeutic index, and it goes like this. A therapeutic index is the dose range at which that medication is effective. For example, if you've got pain, you can take painkillers. If you take too little, it's not going to be enough. If you take too much, it can be very dangerous and you might even die. So there's a range in which it's effective and it's doing good for you. If you go outside of that range, it becomes either unhelpful or it can become even harmful. Now, when I was 17, I discovered flashcards for the first time, and it was magical. One of my friends was doing really well, and they said, hey, this is a technique I use. I tried it, and I loved it, and I went all in on it. I had thousands of flashcards, and honestly, a lot of the results that I got in my first year of uni were because I was so heavily involved in my flashcards. So it was working well. What's the problem? The problem was that it wasn't sustainable, and when I got into medical school, I had so many flashcards that I was getting overwhelmed. I didn't have time to finish them all, and it also wasn't enough. I wasn't being able to think in the way that I needed to think. Yes, I could recall the facts, but I couldn't use the knowledge properly. So how does this relate to overdosing? Well, the thing is, because I had so many flashcards and I was spending so much time just getting through them, it was taking time away from me to invest in learning about other methods that I could use or experimenting. I basically trapped myself. I needed to change my methods, but I was spending so much time with my current methods I didn't have time to change them. And so this is when I realized that a technique can be helpful, but if you use it too much, it can actually harm you in the long run. So what did I do differently? I started making tiny adjustments to how I study every 2 or 3 days. I would experiment with a small change where the consequence of getting it wrong was very small. And then I'd reflect on how it's been going and how I felt about it across the next 2 or 3 days, so that eventually I was able to rely on flashcards less and less. I knew that what I was doing right now wasn't sustainable. I knew I had to make some kind of change, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to completely remove myself from the current system that I'd built straight away. So I made sure to take very small steps. And the benefit of this was, number 1, obviously that I was able to escape that. But number 2 is that I got really in tune with the effect that my studying was having. I'm always talking about how studying is not learning. Studying is what we do, but learning is what happens in our brain. You wouldn't say you learn unless that time spent studying helped the information become part of your knowledge and stay in your memory so that you can use it. Studying only leads to learning when, number 1, the information is encoded into your memory, and number 2, you can actually use that knowledge through retrieval. If you're not able to do that, then all you've done is spend time on doing this random thing called studying, which hasn't led to learning. And by doing this process of reviewing and making these very frequent adjustments to my process, I was able to be much clearer in terms of what I'm spending my time doing and the impact that it was having on my memory and the quality of my learning. Not only was I able to remove my dependence and over-reliance on flashcards, but also I started seeing that a lot of other things that I was doing with my studying were problematic as well. And that's a story for another video. Now, I know a lot of students find this process very daunting. They've got the system that they're really comfortable with, and there's a level of insecurity or uncertainty around changing this. Me personally, I actually really enjoyed experimenting and the process of actually upgrading myself. But the key is to change things gradually. Don't just take away all of your flashcards and leave a gaping void, because otherwise you're gonna have nothing to fill it. For example, I currently right now have a gaping void in my self-esteem that can only be filled by you liking and subscribing. So let's fast forward. I made all of these changes and eventually I became a super learner, right? No, wrong. I have some other issues, which brings me to my second realization. Don't create learning debt. Yes, learning debt, and I'm not talking about a student loan here. By the time I was in my 4th year of university, I was entering into hospital attachments and I was a pretty decent student. I had already decided that A+ wasn't where I wanted to spend my time because I was getting really involved in teaching and education by that point. So I was getting sort of A's and A- and feeling fairly confident to hit the wards. And then I had my very first attachment, which was general medicine or internal medicine for those of you in the States. And then I failed. I failed my first attachment, and I know this because my boss told me directly I had the knowledge, but I just did not know how to use it in the right way to work with real patients. The way that I had stored and organized that information was set for my exams, not the real world. And what's even worse is that because I'd been studying for these exams, a lot of the times after the exams, I would forget like most of what I had studied. And so what ended up happening is that I would come home from the hospital during my placements and I'd spend my evenings spending hours studying, most of the time just relearning the stuff that I'd learned from, going through med school. I'd go through my old med school notes and just remember the stuff that I'd already studied and then try to make sense of it again in a more useful way. And I remember thinking to myself, why did I not just learn it the right way to begin with? I would have saved so much time. This is what I mean by learning debt. The methods I'd used in the past were fine for my present needs, but they created problems for my future self, which meant that now I had to spend extra time to relearn things properly while also having to learn new material too. I was hit with a double burden of work. So one thing I've realized, which I always tell to my students now, is that the future version of you is probably going to be just as busy or busier than you are now. Don't give the future version of you more work to do. It is worth it to do it right the first time. And even outside of medicine, I've seen this time and time again with the students that I work with, students that have these great systems, getting them good results in the short term, but they're not preparing themselves for the challenges of next year or the year after that. And they eventually just get more and more overwhelmed every year until one day it's just not good enough and something breaks. And then at that point, they're trapped like I was, without any time to make any changes. Once I realized how bad learning debt was, I had to do a complete reset of how I was studying. Luckily, I was already used to experimenting with my methods at the time, so it wasn't too bad. But these are the steps that I teach my students now when they're in the same position. Number 1, identify your retrieval needs. What do you need to know? How do you need to know and think about it? And how long do you need to know it for? How do you need to use that knowledge, not just immediately, but in the future? Number 2, map your current learning process. What do you do when information comes in? Start there. Then what do you do with it? What methods are you using? How are you thinking about it? If you've never really thought about how you learn before, this step can be actually quite challenging. You might have to spend a few days actually observing how you study to actually map it all out. And that's actually a really good thing because it means that you're starting the first step to making some serious improvements. Number 3, challenge your reasoning. Why do you use the methods and processes that you use? Does the method and process you're using allow you to achieve the retrieval needs that you've identified? Do you even know? Do you even know why you're using the methods that you're using, or is it just out of habit or because all of your friends are doing it? Ask yourself whether this process is going to help you to reach your goals in terms of what you need to know, how you need to know it, and how long you need to know it for. And again, you may not know. You may do this step and find that you're drawing blanks, and that's fine. It's just about learning a little bit more, but it's an important step to start mapping out whether you're actually spending your time in a productive way. And watching some of my other videos is gonna help you learn some of that fundamental theory as well. Number 4, learn and experiment. Learn about how learning works, experiment, make some gradual changes like I talked about in my first realization. Take it slow and gradually try to upgrade your system. Before I realized this, yes, I was experimenting, but I didn't have the right goal. So a lot of that time that I'd spent on experimenting and reflecting was sort of wasted. Now, learning is seriously very complicated, and I can't tell you exactly every single process that you need to use for your goals. And in fact, it's kind of impossible because it depends on what your strengths and weaknesses are and what your goals are and what your situation is. The right process for you is going to be different for the right process from someone else. But what does remain true tend to be the principles of effective learning. Even if the flavor is a little bit different, the principles usually in every single instance have to be adhered to. And the videos that I upload on my channel generally are focused on the principles. I want you to know what the principles are so that you can go and craft your own learning process, because it's just not possible for me to tell you everything that you need to do step by step. It doesn't work that way. And one of the most important principles, which I realized embarrassingly late in my kind of learning life, I guess, was that you cannot get stronger without lifting the weight. Maybe because I was just a really busy person with medical school and running my nonprofit and doing my teaching and all of that, but I was pretty obsessed with efficiency. You can probably tell I kind of still am. But as a result of that, I always looked for the faster and easier, less effortful way of doing things. Like, I was always tired. I wanted to spend less effort on things if I could. So I would look through all of these learning techniques and learning systems, and I spent really many hours across years experimenting with methods that were meant to make learning easier and faster for me, which seems perfectly logical, but I realized that that was actually sabotaging me. Let me put it this way. The best way to make learning easier for you in the long run is to actually just be an expert at the topic. The more you know, the more connections that you have to work with, the more you can make sense of new information because you've got more things to connect it to. And to do that, you need to A, know things about that subject, and B, know how to use what you know to make sense of new information, which is a skill. The thing about learning, especially higher order learning, which is the type of learning that builds these networks and connections, is that it requires mental effort. It's like trying to lift a weight just by staring at it. It's not gonna work. And by trying to make learning easier and less effortful, what you're actually trying to do there is remove your brain's need to process the information. You're taking the brain out of the equation, and you cannot build knowledge in your mind when you remove your mind. Building high quality knowledge takes effort. It's actually called desirable difficulty. And as you spend the right effort in the right way, you're able to learn more, build expertise, and then as your expertise grows, it becomes easier and easier to learn more. New information is less new because there are so many more anchor points of prior knowledge that you can actually connect to and make sense out of. It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. As you complete it, it's easier to see how the remaining pieces fit in. But if you avoid the effort and you're just trying to make it faster and easier, and you're not thinking about how to spend the right effort in the right way, and that makes you learn things in isolation or just memorize things superficially using whatever apps or software like I spent a lot of time trying to do, then it makes it harder because it's harder to build those connections. It's kind of like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle by just seeing all the pieces scattered on the floor and just like looking at it, waiting for you to magically just see how it fits together. So now I'm always making sure that I invest that effort in upfront as early as I can to build that knowledge as quickly as I can to make the future version of myself have an easier time of handling that knowledge. Not only am I not creating learning debt, I'm actually building myself a learning asset that continues to give myself rewards over time. So if you want to learn a little bit more around the specific methods that you can use to try to build this high quality knowledge, then a good place to start might be a big picture overview of how I structured my learning system for when I ranked first at Monash for my master's. Or if you've got time, there's this playlist you can check out which goes through the foundations of efficient learning. It's a good place to start. Make sure to like this video, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.